Okay, let's dive into this. We've got this question that sounds, well, pretty straightforward on the surface. How long did it actually take a Qing Dynasty official to buy a house just using their salary?
Right. And you might immediately think, okay, simple math. We even have figures, don't we? Like that common estimate for a basic courtyard house, a sihuan in Beijing during Qianlong's time.
Yeah, around 500 taels of silver. We've heard that number thrown around before in discussions about ancient housing costs. It seems like you just compare income to that 500 taels. Easy peasy.
Ah, but is it really that easy? That's the twist, isn't it?
Exactly. Because a straight-up calculation, just salary versus price, well, it kind of misses the whole picture, the messy reality of it all.
It really does. So our mission here is to unpack that reality. We want to look beyond just the official salary numbers and explore what it actually cost officials to live, especially if they were aiming to buy property in the capital. We're drawing on some detailed source material for this.
Okay, so let's start with that simple, but as you said, misleading calculation. If we look at the official regulations, the De King Widian,
Which was basically the big book of rules for the Qing government, yeah.
right, it lists salaries. Say, a top official, grade 1, based in the capital. Their official salary was 180 taels a year.
And some in the capital got extras, didn't they? Double salaries sometimes, plus rice stipends, especially if they worked in the main ministries.
Exactly. So on paper, you look at 180 taels, maybe more with perks, and a 500 tael house.
Yeah.
Well, heck, they could theoretically buy it in under 3 years, right? Maybe even faster.
Theoretically, yes, but, and this is the huge but, our source points out, that calculation assumes they spend absolutely zero, nothing on food, clothes, travel, anything.
Which is, impossible. You can't just not eat for 3 years while saving up.
Precisely. So that theoretical timeline, it just doesn't hold water in the real world. That calculation completely ignores the cost of being an official.
Okay, so let's break down those costs. What's the first hurdle? The source mentions something immediate for many officials.
The journey to Beijing. If you weren't already living there, and many weren't, you first had to get yourself, and likely your family, to the capital.
And families weren't small. The source knows people married young back then, gives Hessian as an example, married at 18, so you're probably traveling with a spouse, maybe kids.
And that travel wasn't cheap. We're talking long distances, needing transport, lodging along the way. It was a major upfront expense before they even earned their first tael of official salary.
Plus, getting the job in the first place often took years, right? Preparing for those imperial exams was a long haul.
A very long haul. The source mentions candidates could be well into middle age. There's that old Tang Dynasty saying about passing the big Jinqi exam at 50 being considered young.
Wow. And Zhang Jinian becoming the top scholar at 42. So these aren't just fresh-faced kids starting out. They might have established lives responsibilities.
And financing that journey, it wasn't always straightforward. Our source points out it was common to borrow money, maybe get backing from wealthy patrons in your hometown.
Like an investment.
Exactly. An emotional investment, the course calls it. It was kind of an unspoken rule. Local elites might support a promising scholar hoping for influence later. So the official might arrive in Beijing already in debt.
Okay, so huge travel costs, maybe already owing money. Then they arrive in Beijing. Now what? Life in the capital isn't free either.
Far from it. Just getting around the city cost money. No public transport back then, obviously. You needed a horse, maybe a donkey, perhaps even a cart.
And if you have a cart, you need someone to drive it.
Yes.
Right? So staff costs start immediately.
Yes. Hiring help was essential. Our source gives some figures for wages, daily workers getting maybe 200 yuan, monthly staff 300 to 1,500 yuan.
And long-term servants in richer homes.
Could be 3 to 20 taels of silver per year. The text suggests using a middle figure, say 10 taels a year for one servant, just for calculation purposes.
Okay, let's take that 10 taels. We need an example official. How about a mid-level one? Say grade 5.
Good example. A grade 5 official's annual salary was 80 taels.
So hire one servant for 10 taels. Yeah. And boom, you're immediately down to 70 taels left for everything else.
Exactly. And we haven't even touched food yet.
Right. They got rice stipends, sure, but you can't live on rice alone. What about other food?
The source gives some prices. Eggs were cheap, 3 to 5 yuan each, but fish could be 20 yuan a catty, pork 30 yuan a catty if you wanted to eat meat regularly, especially for a whole family.
Now 70 taels starts looking smaller and smaller. Okay, what else? Clothing. Officials needed to look the part, I imagine.
Definitely. Appearance mattered. Fabric wasn't cheap. Basic cotton was maybe 10-20 yuan per chi. That's like a foot, but silk. Much pricier, 50 to 100 yuan per chi.
And how much fabric for a robe?
The source is about 21 chi, so just the fabric for one decent robe could easily be, what, 400 wen or more if it's nicer material. And you'd need more than one outfit.
Of course. You need work clothes, formal wear.
And crucially, all these costs we're talking about, servant, food, clothes, we've mostly been thinking about one person, but officials had families.
Right. The source mentions a typical household might be 5 people, minimum the official, wife, maybe a child, plus a couple of servants. So you multiply food and clothing costs.
It really ramps up. That 80 taels salary, or even the 70 left after one servant, was likely stretched incredibly thin trying to cover a whole household.
And there are always other expenses, aren't there? Things like, well, kids' education, doctors, supporting elderly parents back home.
Social obligations too, entertaining, gifts. The source even mentions things like cosmetics for the wife, health products. It all adds up.
So for our grade 5 official, the idea of saving up 500 taels for a house on just that 80 taels salary seems pretty much impossible, doesn't it? Just maintaining a decent life looks tough.
It paints a picture of real financial struggle for many mid-ranking officials relying solely on their base pay. Buying property would be a distant dream.
Yet, becoming an official was still the ultimate goal for so many people, wasn't it? The source says it was about changing your destiny, getting into the upper class.
Absolutely. The allure was powerful, despite the financial challenges of the official salary itself. Which leads us to this other fascinating aspect, Hwana.
Ah, yes, the practice of buying your way into an official position.
Exactly. And it wasn't necessarily some shady backroom deal, as the source explains. It was actually a recognized centuries-old practice, often used by the government to raise funds quickly, like during wars or disasters.
So you could literally just pay money and get a title. Which jobs?
Not the very top ones. You couldn't buy your way into the Ministry of Personnel or Rights or become a governor general, but many positions below that, like a third-rank Daotai or lower, were purchasable.
And how much did it cost? Was it cheap?
Oh, not at all. The source gives figures. Buying a Daotai rank costs around 13,000 taels. A Zizu, lower down, was about 4,200 taels. Even a county magistrate, a Xixian, was about 3,700 taels.
Wow, 3,700 taels for a Xixian. Let's put that in perspective. That's enough to buy, what, more than 7 of those 500 tael Sioan houses we started with?
Or, as the source calculates, it would take that servant earning 10 taels a year, saving every single coin 370 years to afford that Xixian position.
That's insane. So it begs the question, right? If the official salaries were so low you could barely live, why were people willing to pay thousands of taels just to get the job?
That's the million-tael question, isn't it? The source hints at the obvious answer, the potential for unofficial income corruption.
Right. But it also mentions other motivations could exist, maybe genuine ideals, the desire for power or influence, achieving personal value. Though for this discussion, we're focused on the economics.
And this economic pressure, this gap between salary and expenses, is key context for understanding the next big thing, the Yanglian.
Ah, the integrity nourishing allowance. This was Emperor Yongzheng's big idea, wasn't it? An anti-corruption measure.
Exactly. Introduced in the 1720s, the logic was basically, if we pay officials a lot more, maybe they won't need to be corrupt. Paying high salaries to encourage integrity, as the source puts it.
So essentially a massive bonus on top of the base salary.
A potentially massive bonus. The Yanglian could range anywhere from 10 times to even 100 times the official's basic salary.
100 times. So let's go back to our grade 5 official earning 80 taels. Their Yanglian could be, what, 800 taels? Or up to 8,000 taels a year?
Precisely. Suddenly, with an income potentially in the thousands of taels, buying that 500 tael Siwan doesn't just look possible, it looks comfortable. Maybe even buying a much nicer house is feasible.
So Yanglian basically solved the problem. Officials could now afford houses.
Well, it certainly made it much more possible for those who received a significant amount, but there were catches, as the source points out.
Ah, okay. It wasn't uniform.
No. The amount depended heavily on two things: the official's rank, and crucially, the economic prosperity of the area they governed.
Why the area?
Because the Yanglian was funded locally, essentially from surcharges on local taxes. So an official in a rich, prosperous region would get a much larger allowance than someone in a poor, remote area, even if they held the same rank.
Okay, so it varied a lot. A governor in a wealthy southern province might be rolling in it, while a county magistrate in a poor western region might get a much smaller boost.
Exactly. So while Yanglian was a game changer for some, especially higher-ranking officials in richer areas, it wasn't a golden ticket for everyone across the board.
So for those lucky officials getting a good Yanglian, buying a house finally seemed within reach. They had the purchasing power.
He did. But the source adds one final important wrinkle: market forces.
Meaning,
Well, if suddenly you have a whole class of officials with significantly more money looking to buy property in desirable locations like Beijing,
Hmm.
what happens?
demand goes up, and prices likely follow. Competition for the best houses probably got fiercer too.
Precisely. So even with the integrity-nourishing allowance, actually securing that dream home might still have faced the economic reality of supply and demand.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. We started with what looked like a simple calculation: salary versus house price.
But quickly saw that was way too simplistic. The base salary alone barely covered living costs, let alone saving for a house, once you factor in travel, staff, family, food, everything.
Which made the whole system of buying positions for huge sums, seem even more perplexing, hinting at other financial realities or expectations.
Then came Yanglian, the integrity allowance, which did provide a path to affordability for many officials, especially higher-ranking ones in prosperous areas.
But even that wasn't a guarantee, thanks to varying amounts and potential market inflation for housing.
Exactly. So the answer to how long did it take is, well, it's complicated. For some, relying only on base salary, the answer was probably never. For others, boosted by Yanglian, it became much more feasible, maybe even relatively quick, but subject to their specific circumstances and the housing market itself.
It really shows how official life wasn't just about the stated salary. It was embedded in this much larger, more complex financial world.
Absolutely. It wasn't a simple equation at all.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. This deep dive into Qing officials' finances. What does it tell us about that enduring struggle between income, the cost of actually living, and the drive for a better life, for upward mobility? Are the challenges these officials faced centuries ago entirely alien, or do you see echoes of that same dynamic, the gap between a salary and the dream of, say, homeownership in our world today? Something to think about. If you found this discussion useful, maybe learned something new, definitely hit that subscribe button. We do these deep dives regularly, exploring valuable ideas.
We appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.